Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. All right, the others trickle in there, but we're going to get started with our introduction here. We'll introduce the panelists, and then we'll head into the agenda. I mentioned this, but save some questions for the end. Feel free to drop them in the chat. At the end of the webinar, we're going to save about 10 minutes on the back end to do Q&A, so drop those questions in there, and we'll be sure to answer them at the end. Want to give a big welcome to everyone and thank you for joining. My name is John Stid. I'm the CMO at Dealmaker. I've been immersed in capital raising and community building for about a decade now. First as the co-founder of the Ridge Growth Agency, where we ran the digital marketing campaigns, raised over $500 million for our customers. That agency was acquired by Dealmaker, so we could bring those marketing capabilities in-house to continue to power the capital raises of amazing companies like the ones we have on today's panel. I was telling everybody in the back room there, I feel very lucky at Dealmaker. We get to work with tons of innovative companies, but folks like this who are in Cleantech and material sciences are really changing the world. So, I feel really lucky to be here on the panel with everyone. I want to thank them for the time. I'm excited about what we're going to jump into today. So I mentioned at the end, we'll jump in to some Q&A. We're going to start off first with some intros and then get into the agenda, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So I want to start off with some welcome and introductions. You can see here after that, we'll get into founder stories. What led everybody to this? What was their founder journey that led them to raising capital digitally like this? Why communities love clean tech, right? So, not every company has to start off with a community to raise community capital. These communities exist out there already. And then we'll talk about some of the brand building benefits of retail capital, how, having an army of shareholders on your side can be good for your brand. And then next, how and why founders need to diversify their capital stack. Lots of folks on this call have raised other forms of capital in addition to equity crowdfunding, and we want to talk about that a little bit. And then we're going to jump into the Q&A, as I mentioned. So please continue to drop your questions in the chat there. It already looks pretty active. All right, let's start off with some introductions. First, we have Teague. So Teague is the founder and CEO of EnergyX. EnergyX develops lithium extraction, battery, and refinery technologies that are going to power the transition to sustainable energy. Next, we have Harman. He's the co-founder and CEO of Global Air Cylinder and Wheels, or GACW, literally reinventing the wheel with steel tires that are both airless and 100% recyclable. Their patented design won a Time Best Innovations Award not long ago. And lastly, we have Manuel, CEO of TimePlast. TimePlast creates water-soluble plastic alternatives that are time programmable, meaning that they can be formulated to last a predetermined amount of time. And once that time is hit, they safely dissolve without leaving any microplastics or harmful chemicals behind. So as you can see here from the intros, this is why I'm really excited to be amongst this exciting group. We're truly changing the world with their companies that they're leading. So thank you guys for joining.
Thank you for having me.
First up, we're going to start off with a poll. Let's get to know each other a little bit better here. We're going to pull up a poll, let all of our attendees answer some questions here. And I think we'll be able to use this to cater the answers a little bit more to this audience. So, knowing what types of capital people have raised here. Great. I think we're locked there. Okay. So a lot of angel investment, some venture that maps out, right? Equity crowdfunding, good. You're in good company. And all of the founders on here, we'll talk about it at the tail end. I know some of you have raised different types of capital. So at the end, we're going to talk about that capital stack and how you guys all think about the different types of capital that you've raised. Maybe talk about some of the pros and cons of that. First, I want to start off with some founder stories, right? I talked about how cool the companies are. I would love our audience to understand, what led you guys to this path. So I want to start off with Teague on this first one. Tell us a little bit about, what it was like when you first set out to raise capital for EnergyX, and what made you decide to do things differently.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a pretty cool program. I like the polling and the,
Yeah, now you're on the main stage.
now I'm on the main stage. So when I started EnergyX, I knew that lithium was a big idea and that we had a lot of tailwinds. There was a lot of momentum behind electric vehicles and batteries. So I started talking to potential investors about the most common, I think, form of investment. Well, when you start out companies, it's mostly friends and family, right? And I was fortunate enough to have the ability to invest some of my own capital to get the company off the ground. So we had a nice foundation and start, and that allowed us to cross a few milestones in terms of executing some agreements for IP, getting like a very small MVP, minimum viable product, in the research and development stage. And ultimately that with that foundation, I said, I'm going to go out and raise venture capital money. Those discussions are always difficult. And that tends to be the case because they typically have all the leverage over entrepreneurs, unless, there's obviously the stories that people hear about these explosive growth companies that are out in Silicon Valley and all the investors are competing over them. That's typically not the case. Usually it's the companies competing over investment dollars from venture capitalists. So, I started thinking about alternatives, and while we were ultimately successful in raising some venture capital, the impetus to that was one of my buddies was working at a crowdfunding company, not Dealmaker, a different one of the aggregator sites, and he introduced me to crowdfunding. And we put up our first campaign and saw a lot of organic traction. And even prior to that, I would get emails with people asking me how they could invest in EnergyX. So I knew there was really something there. So for us, my capital raising journey was initially me putting in my own money, then getting some friends and family that were actually debt instruments, convertible notes that are basically debt that converts into equity in the next round of financing. That next round of financing was some crowdfunding. Then we leveraged that to go do our first kind of institutional venture round, which was our Series A. Then we went back and did more crowdfunding. And then we went and did another institutional round of Series B, and then followed that with more crowdfunding. So we've had this hybrid approach, which has worked for us. We've kind of leveraged one raise to go into the other, showing the venture capitalists that the valuation we're asking for is legitimate, and that's backed by essentially the market investing it at that valuation. And then we go kind of back and forth. So that's been the story of EnergyX capital raising.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Teague. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that capital stack story, sort of like, doing those in tandem when we touch on that in that final segment there. But yeah, love that you found this organically, literally through a friend, who told you about it, and it just seemed to match up with the experience that you were having out there trying to raise venture capital. And it was really good timing for him to approach you. So we're obviously glad that you did. Manuel, how about you? Tell us about your story to, ultimately community capital. What led you here?
Right. Thank you. In my case, it has been quite the challenge to raise funds the institutional route, not because there's not many options, but because of the vision of Templast. So Templast was founded with the idea that 100% of everything we manufacture has to be polar. As you may understand, there's only two types of materials on the planet. You have non-polar and you have polar materials. Now, everything essentially that's non-Templast is non-polar, but the surface of the earth and even our own bodies are composed of water mostly. So for us, it didn't make much sense to go the non-polar route. My point is, our perspective is so counterintuitive that when I was working for PepsiCo, I was privileged enough to work under global directors such as Brad Rogers in Plano, Texas. He was the global director of packaging discovery. And I was able to get a glimpse of what the big corporations think about plastic. And then early on, Nestle acquired one of our technologies for PET depolymerization. And so we kind of play around a venture capital firm in Canada, and I understood that the vision of Templars could be diluted if we went that route of institutional funding. And that's why I started having a conversation with crowdfunding companies and kind of understand the benefits. And it has been incredible because every other venture capital or big angel investor that I have spoken with, they really don't understand our vision. And we considered that it was a big risk to get our governance diluted and our vision diluted, for that matter, if we went the institutional funding. So everything we've done so far has been equity crowdfunding, incredible success. We're super happy about everything we've done in the past and what we're doing today. And I would recommend this to all those companies that have super innovative products with great technologies, but the vision may be counterintuitive. But if you stick to your future and you know what's best for your company, equity crowdfunding can be the only way for you to realize your dreams. Because even PhDs in chemistry, they early on they didn't really follow our chemistry. So for just to give you one example, we launched one of our products to the consumer. I sent a link. It's for the 3D printing community. We created four-dimensional filaments to create four-dimensional objects, the likes of which nobody has ever seen before. For example, we can make a filament that it's burnable. It's the first burnable filament. We can make a filament that's dissolved in the presence of water at predetermined length of time, so you can make four-dimensional objects such as an automated steam pot, which would be like an analog computer in which water is the battery. So these things, I don't think that institutional funding would have allowed us to go this route. They essentially go to and want to do the big business with the big companies. We want to grow organically. And so we thought, to keep our vision undiluted, the best is to go equity crowdfunding, and it has been great for us.
Oh, fantastic, Manuel! Thanks for sharing that. So, if I could say that back to you, they may have understood the vision scientifically, but you feel as though they may have hampered it in the sort of commercialization of that, plus some of the ownership and dilution that comes with taking on institutional funding. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes, they maybe just want to go and find the Costco's of the world and the Walmarts of the world and just do business with the big companies. We would like to create a better world, product by product. So we're more on the organic product by product growth instead of just the raw material B2B big businesses. And I couldn't find an institutional or venture capitalist that would understand this vision that could support us. So we rather went the equity crowdfunding instead.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods. He jokes about some of the institutional investors. They're like hitchhikers with credit cards, and they're happy so long as you take them where they want to go. So if you want to, commercialize a direct-to-consumer product, which sounds great. I know you all have some traction in that. You may have been swayed off that path. Harman, very curious to hear about your path, right? Particularly, given how would I characterize it, the breadth of what you all had to build, scientifically. Tell us how you came to raising capital direct to consumer like this, and your story behind that.
Thank you, John. It's been a ride. We started back in 2016 with the company. I think it's got a great concept back then. We're going out to potential clients and talk about an airless wheel design. And first question you get back is, well, if it's so great, why didn't anyone else come up with this? Or why are the tire companies not doing this? So we did get a bit of angel loan, and that was converted. And then, we go out to all these VCs that are all, green and into innovation. But for them to grasp something that's such a change in paradigm, it was just either seemed too much, or we've had cases that, for the amount of money we need, because we're dealing with big toys, those rounds would have killed us, because, they typically want to take 33% for $1 million. That's very typical at those stages. And that's for us half a set of R&D wheels. And, we need to make big 12 so far. So that was a bit frustrating. Also back then, I'm talking 2020, if you weren't crypto, pharma, or marijuana, I literally had companies hanging up on me. What I see now, it's an awful lot of AI. Hey, can you put anything with AI in your wheel, and it will sell like crazy? And I said, look, we're Cleantech. We're a tangible product. It's just, we can, but I don't want to sell it as AI. It's a real solution for a real problem. Then I got in touch with Anders, who's with Dealmaker, and he guided me through this, because there's this big misconception that you're crowdfunding. And so I like to call that crowd investment. We're not just holding our hands out for a freebie. We're taking people extremely seriously. And I've had VCs coming to me say, well, you're raising money publicly, you're uninvestable for us. And lately in particular, I cut them off. I said, look, I'm highly respectful of people that have put in $300, $1,000, but we've got people that put in $25, $50, even $100,000. And people putting the life saving in this because they believe in a better world. And like you said in the introduction, John, people want to see change. And just because the corporations don't want to do it doesn't mean the public doesn't want to do it. So when that happened, we got involved with crowdfunding, and the response is just phenomenal. And definitely in the first couple of rounds, we've had a couple of days. One day in particular, we raised, I think it was over $1.8 million in 36 hours, because we just had the right placement, and I think it was Yahoo Finance that picked up on it, and it just went through the roof. So that meant for me, okay, it resonates well with people. People want this. People want to be part of things that up until now they've been excluded from, and it was only destined for VCs. And we've got an amazing investor base. We're very active in contacting them. They write me emails. I'm on the phone with many of them, and it does create this feeling of community. Even though myself, I'm not a big social media person at all. But being in touch with people that really believe in your product is not only a financial boost, but definitely also an encouraging boost for us, to keep up the work and keep on going. Because in the end of the day, that's what we're doing it for, to change the world for everyone.
And Harman, thanks. You're making my job as a moderator pretty easy, because I want to talk about community next, right? Just to grab some threads of what you guys all touched upon there, ownership, not just in terms of percentage owned, right? But really being able to take your company in the direction that you need to, that you want to for business, right? Being a part of that, and also access to capital that you guys were able to raise, given the strong businesses that you're building and people wanting to invest in change. So, you were able to take the reins and raise on your own terms, right? So like I said, Harman, I love that you mentioned community. I think a misconception that people come in with is, I don't have a large existing community to raise from already, right? And maybe that's sort of that misnomer that you were touching on there, Harman, around, crowdfunding, which is a phrase and a term I personally dislike, because, people are making these investment opportunities, but I guess that's what happens when you let Congress name things. But for you guys, that misconception of people thinking, I don't have a big audience, how can I go do this, right? And you guys have all proved that you don't need to, right? These communities will find you, right? Particularly in the clean tech space, where a lot of these communities exist already. Harman, you mentioned the article that kind of took off, right? Some of them are just getting it out there in the world for people to see it, and these communities say, basically I've been waiting for this, right? Because Teague, your end users and the consumer, a mixed consumer and lithium there. They're not buying lithium directly from you. So I'd be curious to just go around and hear what you guys have experienced from running your raises publicly, right? And the ability to tap into these communities, and any interesting anecdotes that you've experienced of people, reaching out, because there are these pockets of, people wanting to A, invest for a return, right? But B, to, invest in companies that they're like, oh, these companies are changing the world. So whether it was directly through paid media or existing communities, can you guys talk about the experience you've had in tapping into these communities and also the response that you've had from them? Manuel, I want to start with you on that one.
Thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that once we figured out that we could have an impact out in the market, and that the message that we're crafting in the equity crowdfunding campaigns, is resonating with the public, then we noticed that we could turn the same marketing capability into selling products. And that is a pretty easy shift, because most of the things that you require to have a D2C business, you develop those for your equity crowdfunding campaign, meaning relationship with marketing agencies, understanding how the D2C channels work, from the algorithm at Meta, and how to operate the social media and the internet and to your favor. So for us, it was an easy transition, going from selling stock to selling products. And as we all know, that's one of the best tools ever made by humans. AI and the internet put together allows companies like ours to essentially have an infinite amount of, pragmatically, limitless amount of eyeballs to show your products. Not only that, but if you have a niche like the 3D printed market, it becomes so easy because the algorithm already knows who is out there. So instead of us shooting a video for an equity crowdfunding campaign, then we just go ahead and shoot a video for our products. And we know we're more familiar with the entire process, and it was very easy for us to leverage and capitalize on the market now, instead of selling stock, for selling products, because we did equity crowdfunding and everything that we learned during that process.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. I think, Harman, you touched on this a little bit, the article that took off, right? You all fall in this overlap of not just material sciences, right? But, you're building this hardware. There's a lot of, air compressors in these tires, like that sort of thing, right? And you fit in this clean tech space. Did you get any interesting sort of inbound from the communities that took hold? And, what did they share with you about why they were investing? Harman, if you're able to hear me there, the audio may have cut out.
Sorry, was that directed to me?
Yeah, Harman, I'd be curious. You all operate in this interesting sort of Venn diagram overlap of, it's both clean tech, right? And there's a hardware element to it as well. So I'd be curious, there's communities around, if anything bubbled up from those different communities where, you had interesting inbound from them in terms of why they were investing.
So we do get a lot of people thinking along with us. It's not always helpful, I must say. I mean, we always appreciate people thinking along with us, but it's a highly engineered product, and we're dealing with the mining industry. So you do get very interesting conversations with people that have been in the mining industry, and they just said, look, I get it. And what I see also when we're managing, as I'm not a big social media fan, but on Facebook at them, when we're dealing with people on Facebook, they are very good conversation starters, and it just shuts down all the negativity, and it brings a lot of people to the table. Oh, I never knew about this, or now you make me think, and okay, this is perhaps a good idea. So our product is not a B2C, so we don't sell to consumers, but the people that think along with us and have been in the business to create a huge amount of awareness, which again pulls in more people, first of all, to really think and rethink what we're doing. And then, it tantalizes them to become part of that community.
Fantastic. Thanks for doing that. Yeah, I like the way that you phrase it, right? The ability to find pockets of people that think along with you. There's folks in mining who, they're basically saying, hey, I didn't even need to read the website. I get what you're doing, and I love that. Teague, for you, as an Austin-based company, I'm also in Austin. I've had the pleasure of being at some of the events with the investors there, swarms of investors. It was just super cool to see that in person. As a side note, it's one of those things that is really interesting about raising capital online, right? There's this digital component. And while you touched on this, it's like, all of the eyeballs that you can garner via digital, but you still want to have that sort of investor experience where it feels a little bit one-to-one. Teague, for you all in the lithium space, right? A lot of communities around that, lithium being white hot. When you're in person with those investors, do they talk about it more from the community base? Is it financial return? Is it both? What are they saying to you in terms of their affinity to clean tech in the space, for why they invested?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. At the end of the day, any investment is predicated on financial returns. Like, let's be honest. So that is probably the first and foremost reason that anybody invests. We've had a pretty good track record with hitting milestones and continuing to achieve higher share prices based on those accomplishments, both from an institutional side and a retail side. So right now, this is all still on paper, right? We haven't had any sort of liquidity event or, go public or change of control. But on paper, investors' share price has now been marked up several times, which is, a good thing. I mean, that's how all accredited investors and angel / venture capitalists work. They make investments. As more investors come on, that's typically at a higher price, and they hope for some sort of exit event. So I have those conversations with investors. Then there's obviously the impact side. Like, what we're doing is a huge need in the supply chain. And basically the thesis is that if you believe in the transition to electric vehicles, and electric vehicles, taking over market share, then batteries are needed for that. And then therefore lithium is needed to make those batteries. So we play a critical integral process in kind of the supply chain of batteries and therefore electric vehicles. So there's a lot of questions about that and about, what our next big milestones are, how our progress is with developing our technology and our projects. And I think that, it's somewhat of a community. I'm not going to sit here and say that like all my investors know each other and are talking like on message boards and things like that. But there's definitely a community in the clean tech world, be it, like Tesla owners clubs, like those people are friends and those people are advocates of the energy transition and stuff that we're doing. We obviously try to have some events and stuff at our facilities here in Austin. But like you said earlier, it's not something that like we don't sell directly to consumers. It's similar to maybe say like an NVIDIA play. Like, it's not like NVIDIA is selling chips to, your average retail consumer. But I think that that's the type of kind of supply chain mindset that our investors are seeing. Like, we're in the supply chain of batteries that are going to power, essentially, hopefully all types of mobility devices from cars to other, whereas NVIDIA is in supply chain of AI and data centers. And they're not to say that we would have the type of returns that NVIDIA had, but there's that similar kind of mindset of investing into critical supply chains for future technologies.
Yeah. And I like how you mentioned the milestones that you spoke about, right? And while there is community, that's not going to max out your raise, right? People are looking for financial return. I do just find, Cleantech, there are pockets of people that, make it easier to target, but, ultimately, people are looking for a return. So, maybe some of them don't care about Cleantech, but I like what you talked about because, it's not just the communities that are out there already. It's the ones that you start to build, right? So Teague, you talk about hitting those milestones that you've hit, right? And I've seen it on live raises for you all when you hit those milestones and then go back to that community and say, hey, we told you we were going to do ABC, right? Now we're going to go do XYZ and we're raising capital again. You get that incredible response, right? And I know, all three of you have done that to some degree across your capital raises, and that really power of building community, bringing them into your brand. So, I think that's important for everybody to note that's out there, the sort of, I think of it like a glacier, right? Because it kind of, it can build slowly, but it can be really powerful and forceful as you have these milestones, as you update your community and tell them what's going on. Because, it's not just your investor list that you're building a list of followers, right? And all these email addresses that you have who maybe they didn't get in the last round, but as you continue to send these updates, right, they could come back and either reinvest or make a first-time investment. So, I think that's one of the powers of digital capital raising that you guys are all executing on. So there's an element of, investor capital that comes from that. But I'm curious, just from a brand building perspective, right? If anything has come from that, Harman, I know you mentioned you're not in D2C, right? We've had raises in the past where, companies have landed a B2B banking customer as a byproduct of their raise. I'm curious if you have any interesting anecdotes of, brand building that happened, whether that was with partners that you're trying to manufacture with or introductions that were made, anything that has happened as a result of you putting your brand out there in the world through a digital capital raise and seeing the benefit come back through you that maybe wasn't even directly invested capital. It's okay if the answer is no, like you on the spot there.
I'm thinking, actually, no. The thing is, we don't need many clients. We don't need many suppliers. We're dealing with mining companies, so they typically don't get involved with us on that level. But in general, so to that point, it does give a lot of validation in a way to your product as well. Again, VCs say, "Oh, well, I don't touch that; it's dangerous." And for me, in Dutch, you would say the unknown is what you're scared of. I just don't know really how it works because it's still relatively new. So the question always comes up: how does it look like on the cap table? So it's actually just one line item, and how do you communicate with them? It's not that difficult, like you said. Throw out a good quarterly report, and you get fantastic response, and create real expectations that are obtainable. And if you hit them, make sure you communicate that. But when it comes down to us helping the business to the next level, as I said, we've had some references to it, but dealing in mining companies that are typical clients, we have to go through at least 6, 7, 8 departments. So there's a lot of people that have said, "Hey, I know someone, I know a tire fitter." Well, it's actually not the person I need to talk to. I need to speak to procurement and to purchasing and to innovation, and then to bring it to management level, and then to implementation, and then risk assessment. So just in our case, it's rather complex, and it takes years to nurture these relationships. And it's almost impossible that with one phone call you get the right person. Well, it's one of the right people on the call. So for us, that hasn't been a value add. Again, in our case.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we've had the experience of leveraging those investor updates. I see that Jason asked a question here around, how do you leverage some of those big announcements? We just see it as table stakes, being able to, continue to update this community and keep them engaged. So I'm glad you're doing it on that front. Manuel, for you, somebody who there is a D2C component of what you do, I know, which has had some traction recently. Can you talk about any of the brand building of, what happens when you put Time Blast out there in the world through a digital capital raise, and what has come back to you? Again, sort of maybe not invested capital directly, but, inbound partnerships, like that sort of thing.
Yeah. No, I think the future, it's definitely going to be related to equity crowdfunding. I think that it happened in many aspects of human life. I think equity crowdfunding 5 years ago was, or even a little bit more so, was looked down upon. Much like back in the day when you met your wife through an online dating site, and people were like, "Oh, where do you guys meet?" And you were like afraid to say online because he was not looked up, right? But nowadays, it's the other way around. I think the future, it's definitely crowdfunding, because the level of scrutiny that we have gotten is through the roof. Every little argument that we make out there, all of our patents and all of our products have been continually scrutinized. That's good, because it means that the companies that do make it out of equity crowdfunding into, let's say, an IPO event or something like that, those companies are potentially better off than a company that maybe grew through, just some venture capital and institutional funding that didn't get the level of scrutiny that only comes with thousands upon thousands of investors looking into your patents, looking into your every detail. In our particular case, I think that yes, we can, if we get our manufacturing going, we can rival a big petrochemical company, but that's not the point, I think. Unlike, let's say, lithium production, plastic is so tightly controlled by a few number of companies, and they already produce a super high quality, very cheap material. So, so for us to penetrate that saturated market, it was difficult. However, thanks to equity crowdfunding, we saw an opportunity out in the market. And if you follow many of the companies that have reached $1 trillion valuation, they're typically D2C. They have somewhat of a component. So in our particular case, we have many technologies, chemical technologies, and we have been busting our asses to find ways to make our business model a D2C model, so that we also have a path to become a $1 trillion company. And we think that opportunity is out there, but equity crowdfunding is an essential part to building our brand, because every month we get to a new level of scrutiny, I think, and there's no going back. If you surpassed all of your concerns, all of the questions that people may have about your technology, you launch your product, people love it, people like it. It's very difficult for you, I think, to fail out there once you have a proven track record for raising funds and for producing products. I think this is the future, and we're happy that we're here.
That's great. Well, yeah, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So, people, all the eyeballs coming into it. I love what you said about the analogy to dating apps, which I totally get, right? I joke, if you were going to reinvent raising capital today in the world of the internet, you probably wouldn't start with this, analog and conversations, right? You'd leverage the power of the internet to, raise capital for your company. So, I, just a huge fan of what you three have done to propel that forward, because in the early stages of equity crowdfunding, I think it was just a different time period, and there's much higher quality caliber company raising capital now. And, these eggs continue to hatch as they either grow or have liquidity events, right? Some of the early companies are now on the NASDAQ and NYSE. So it's really great to see that maturation process happen across the industry, with great companies like the ones that you guys are leading. Teague, touch on the community question just as the last go around here in the panel before we move on to some thoughts on capital stack. But as the one who's done the most number of rounds here, right, I think EnergyX may be able to fill a stadium with the number of investors there. I'd love for you to tie that into what that means when you all have an update, right? and the capital that you're able to raise on the back of that continued progress, now that you have that sort of glacial momentum going, or even, when you open up the new facility in Austin, what that means for, investors coming out to that. So how has that community, contributed to the brand that you've built?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you have success, it's certainly compounding. So, the first Reg CF we did was about, I think, 1.4 million or so. And then the second Reg CF was like 3.3 million. And then the first Reg A and the third overall crowdfund offering we did was about 7-ish million. And then last year, we knocked it out of the park and did the full 75 million Reg A for our fourth retail offering. So there's been momentum, there's been learning what works, what doesn't work, building a larger and larger investor base. I think we have close to 40,000 investors now. And yeah, as long as you are executing on milestones and continue to progress the company forward and are hitting, whatever it may be, like revenue marks or, profit marks, or operational milestones, that's exciting for not only myself and people that work at EnergyX, but also the investors, because they know that, theoretically their investment is growing. So when we have announcements or when we have events, at our ribbon cutting for our new facility in Austin, I think we had a few hundred people come out. That included partners and investors. Like, we invited people. I didn't just invite anybody from all over, but we invited investors that lived in Texas. So maybe people hopped on a flight and came down. But yeah, it was, it's exciting that this is, now kind of mainstream. I thought that was a pretty good analogy, Manuel, about online dating, where, something that maybe looked at as not the norm initially, then like takes the main stage and kind of becomes the status quo. Not to say that raising money online through Reg CF or Reg A is quite there yet, but it's certainly widely accepted. And case in point with what EnergyX did, like, we had one of the most successful Reg A's out there, and now we're talking to the SEC about how we can increase the limits, and all these companies that could take they could have more benefit and more impact, and investors that could have more access to exciting companies that are doing similar things to us.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, again, just big fan. Not only are you guys innovating in the industries that you're in, but also for raising capital this way in general, right? So a lot of good learnings there. It's going to go back, and this is the final segment here, and we'll jump into some Q&A. So we'll try to keep this one a little bit more brief, so we have some time for Q&A. There's a lot of questions here in the thread. Harman, you had mentioned it earlier, right? And I love that you had spoken about, hey, they want to, when a VC comes in, they're wondering what that cap table looks like, and you tell them, hey, it's one line item on the cap table. Can you guys just broadly talk about your capital stack and sort of alleviating some of those concerns? Because we do hear that commonly from potential customers coming in, hey, what are VCs and institutions going to think about this? So Harman, can you share broadly some of the conversations you've had and what those conversations were like with other investors that weren't familiar with equity crowdfunding?
Yeah. So look, I treat every investor equally, and I did see a few comments coming by. It's time consuming, and some of the smallest investors sometimes scream the loudest. I think it's very manageable as long as you set the expectations right. So I clearly say to everyone, look, there's a quarterly update, and it will come, but I can't just, if anything happens straight away, throw it out in the open, because, well, in our case, definitely with engineering, things change all the time. Designs change. We're upgrading it. We're updating it. So that's the way I think to control it. Webinars have helped us a lot. That people get very excited about what's going on and seeing a face behind the company. I think that will help massively. That's just a piece of paper coming through. But I found it very manageable. It's very doable as long as you are on the front foot of that communication. And like Teague said, everyone wants to hear what you're doing. There's an awful lot of people that have put money in and just forget about it. I've seen that as well. But equally so, there's a lot of people that were so passionate about it. Part of it. And, I went part of it. One case is now you asked about what you have received a few ideas on what to do and how to create mission statements and vision statements. So I enjoy it.
Well, it's great. I love that you touched on webinars, underutilized medium that people have to do updates, right? And it provides a substantive update and gives that one-to-one feel to it too. Manuel, any comments that you have on sort of, alleviating concerns around the capital stacks, has your success in equity crowdfunding dissuaded other investors, or have you just, not needed to go that route?
I think that it's the legislation is actually in favor of the companies to go this route instead, and it makes a compelling case for companies to go into the IPO without an underwriting firm. But there's also a significant amount of exposure. However, if you go and you disclose everything that's happening that may be a risk for potential investors, the legislation is on your side. So it doesn't matter how odd it is. If you think it's a risk, you just put it in the Form C, Form A, or whatever. It's the regulation that you're working with, and there you're going to be fine. I think that the managing investors it's easy. We have over 6,000 investors right now, and we use Klaviyo, a automatic system to reach out all of the investors, and it typically, I would say, a very small percentage of the investors will reach out and be ask tough questions. Most, if you maintain an open dialogue and you essentially disclose everything you're doing, most investors are going to be happy with you. Remember, these people put money because they believed in you, right? So they're most likely to be your friends than your enemies. Now, having said that, of course, I would recommend everyone to disclose everything they're doing. There's no risk on disclosing. There is risk on not disclosing, but once you've disclosed everything on your forms, I think even an alienated investor has no claims because he invested knowing the risk that you told them beforehand. So I think it's on that perspective, it's a great tool to have, and I don't really see much problem handling thousands of investors, in all honesty.
Yeah. And thanks for diving in some of the functionality that you use for that. I think people get a little concerned about it. And, you're able to use things like Klaviyo to do that sort of outreach. Teague, I want to talk about what you had mentioned. It sounds like there is a little bit of a volley where, you're able to raise equity crowdfunding, right? And then potentially need some institutional investment. You can go to them and say, hey, we just raised at that. Is that because it helps validate that valuation in the market, and they see this momentum that you have? Can you share a little bit more about how you leverage that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's certainly some of that in there. For us, it's all about continuing to hit milestones as we scale up our technology to commercialization. Ultimately, EnergyX needs to go build big lithium production plants, but these will be like $1 billion revenue per annum plants, but it takes a lot to get there. So we brought in huge strategic partners, including General Motors, POSCO, which is a big Korean steel and battery company, and Eni, the multinational oil and gas company out of Italy. And when we brought them in our Series B, they obviously had questions about the retail offerings that we would do. It's something that's still generally unfamiliar to institutional or corporate investors. But we created comfort with those investors based on the SEC regulations. Like it's black and white in the SEC. Like these are all all the investors that come in through Reg A or one line item on the cap table and things like that. So we really created comfort with our institutional partners. Using Reg A or crowdfunding as kind of like a baseline of valuation has been something that's been discussed in meetings. Obviously, institutional investors bring somewhat different value than a retail investor. Like, number one, they can invest, much larger check sizes, 10, 20, $50 million checks. That's not something that retail investors can do. And with that comes, certain rights for preferred shareholders. They also are bringing, strategic value, like being a customer, right? Ultimately, GM needs to could be our biggest customer. So there's value in that. So they could get discounts because of that strategic value that they bring. But, nonetheless, like all the money that we've raised has been very important for our mission and continuing to hit milestones and objectives. And the people that invested in the first Reg A or the first Reg CF, have gotten tremendous returns on paper from where they invested. And I hope that continues to be the trend, as we continue to scale and commercialize our technology.
Well, it's certainly been exciting to watch, and thank you for sharing your experience in that, all of you guys. It's we run into that. People are concerned, will raising equity crowdfunding sort of dissuade other investors, right? And it's clear that that's not the case. I want to save the final 6 minutes for Q&A. I was hoping to do the last 10. I'm going to cherry pick some of these guys, these questions in here. Then if you three have, any experience in piggybacking on that, I'd love for you to just join in on the conversation. One of the first ones I see here, and just for everybody, a lot of questions in here in the email that we send out probably next week. There's a lot of questions to answer. I want to get back to all of your questions and make sure we do answer them, but I'm going to cherry pick a few here. So Jerry, my first experience with crowdfunding, is there a method for determining crowdfunding interest before diving in, right? Yes, testing the waters. Another thing that probably could have been named better. That's like the official name that they have for it there. So that would be a testing the waters campaign. I think EnergyX has had some success in this with when they close around, opening up a testing the waters campaign so that, people can continue to fill out, say, hey, an indicated interest in reserving shares here. So yeah, Jerry, there's a function for that for companies to test the waters, so to speak. Next one here, Renji. Okay, so yes, I get that most of the money comes in the final weeks. So all three founders here are certainly familiar with that. But are you sitting around, watching your campaign, right, that long? When people have better things to do? Yes, we want to make sure that all of these founders are, spending their time on the business. Guys, I know this is part of the marketing approach that we'll typically share is, hey, you want to, test slowly, linearly, right? Making sure that we're scaling up and in line with benchmarks so that we can spend efficiently on your way there. So, Renji, there's an optimization approach to that. We want to make sure that the benchmarks are in track with what we've seen for digital capital raises. There's also the dynamic that, in that final 30 days, it's like anything, everybody needs a deadline, right? I can imagine that happens in the institutional and VC world. All of a sudden when that, lead investor comes in, things start filling up, right? Now there's a deadline. So that is part of the approach. We typically see anywhere from 50 to 60% of the capital be raised in that final month. And I know it's high pressure for all the founders on here. but it is part of the dynamic. We're trying to scale up, spend efficiently on the way there. And that means message testing, what assets work best, what channels are working best, and then ultimately leveraging those learnings plus time-based scarcity to finish out the round efficiently. We've got 3 minutes left here. We'll see another one. Okay.
Ron, you should keep going and answer some of these questions, but I'm gonna bounce.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I'm doing a read along here. Teague, thanks so much for joining. We guys can jump as well, just so everybody knows. I'm going to stay on and answer some more questions. We'll shoot a note. The guys, seriously, thank you so much. This was a real blast to do. I appreciate it. All right. So in the final couple minutes here, we'll answer a few more. How does everyone find the pressure of so many investors, and are you afraid of anything legally having so many investors? That question is from George. Yeah, I think Manuel touched on this, not the legalities of it, but just, how to communicate with people in terms of the scale of those investors. There's a lot of systems that make that easy. Time Blast is on Klaviyo, so they're able to leverage that to communicate to their investors. Harman, touched on this as well, how to do regular updates and letting them know that you'll send quarterly updates. So sounds like some good expectation setting and transparent communication is just a good way and a best practice to do that. We have 1 more minute left. Let's see here. Alexandra, we have hundreds of investors on our cap table already. That's a lot to manage. It is. I also find smaller investors sometimes demand more attention. Harman mentioned this. What have the panelists' experiences been with crowdfunding as it relates to adding small investors to the cap table? It can be a huge drain on resources. I'm happy to answer on Harman's behalf, but it sounds very much, Harman, like what you were talking about there. Sometimes those are some of the louder voices. You treat everybody equally, incredible best practice. But it sounds like, part of your response to them is, hey, we do quarterly updates. That's just how we run the business. So I think it sounds like some clear communication that you have with them, and then, sticking to your word and your best practices about, how to deliver updates to them on a quarterly basis. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also fine to agree to disagree. Don't be afraid to tell people that, look, okay, you invested in my company. We're the management team that you put your trust in. We're the industry product engineer experts here. So I take it on board. I'll have a look at it. But again, just got more than, even with 10 people, even with 5 board members, there's always one that disagrees with everything. So you have that anyways, but you need to be able to learn how to navigate that. And again, it's very fine to sometimes say, thank you very much. I'll take it on board. But, sometimes we agree to disagree.
Well put. Well, I know we're at the top of the hour and actually a minute past. So Manuel, Harman, seriously, thank you guys very much. This was a lot of fun to come on and discuss with you. For everybody, we didn't get to your questions. I mentioned we'll send out a follow-up email that tries to answer everything. There's a lot of good questions in here that we didn't get to, but a wonderful discussion that just left us less time for Q&A. So I want to say thanks to everybody who attended, and another thanks to Harman, Manuel, and Teague. So really appreciate it, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, man. Everyone, appreciate it.